Taniya Brooks had just handed a receipt to a customer when her manager grabbed the mic and accused her of theft. Right there, in front of everyone. No proof. No warning. Just one word. Security. Phones came out. Her hands started shaking, but what no one knew was who was watching from aisle 7. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The soft chime of the automated sliding doors welcomed Taniya Brooks into her new workplace, but no one looked up. No nods, no warm greetings, just the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beep of items scanned at checkout. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like something colder. Taniya adjusted the crisp forest green apron around her waist and stepped further into the store, taking it all in. The floors gleamed like glass. The produce section looked like a still life painting. Even the employees moved like part of a carefully rehearsed ballet. Everything screamed upscale, elegant, pristine, and white. It wasn't just that she was the only black person on staff, though that stood out quickly enough. It was the way eyes didn't quite meet hers. The way conversations paused when she entered the room. The way her manager, Brian Decker, barely concealed his irritation when she introduced herself. "Right," he said, glancing at her resume on the clipboard like it was a takeout menu. "Marketing major? From where again?" "Spelman," Taniya replied, keeping her tone even. "Graduated last spring." Never heard of it," he muttered, and scribbled something that looked suspiciously like a question mark next to her name. That was the first 10 minutes. Her station was Register 3. Taniya stood behind the counter, scanning organic trail mix and oat milk lattes, listening to the customers' idle chatter. Most barely acknowledged her. A few offered a tight-lipped thanks, but many seemed surprised to see her there, as if they were expecting someone else. Someone they saw in their minds when they heard elegant customer experience. Brian's gaze was like a laser. He watched her constantly, arms folded, mouth twisted into that corporate half-smile that never reached the eyes. He offered zero feedback except when he thought she'd done something wrong. "Watch how you bag," he snapped at one point. "Customers here care about presentation." Taniya blinked. The bag looked fine. The second day, she came in 5 minutes early. Brian clocked her in exactly on the dot. The third day, she wore a protective-style waist-length box braids, freshly done. That morning, one of the cashiers, a bubbly blonde named Carrie, whispered to another, "She looks different today," followed by a snicker. By the end of the week, Taniya had memorized which coworkers would make eye contact, 2, which would pretend she wasn't there, 4, and which only spoke to her when something needed cleaning up, too many. Still, she kept her head high. She wasn't going to let pettiness drag her down. She had goals. A full-time marketing job. Maybe freelancing on the side. And getting out of the suburban bubble. For now, the paycheck would help with student loans. Then came the incident. Saturday. Peak traffic. The line at Register 3 stretched halfway into the aisle. A woman, mid-50s, designer sunglasses, perched on her head like a crown, handed over a jar of imported honey. Taniya scanned it. The price blinked on screen. "That's not right," the woman said sharply. Taniya kept her voice calm. "It's what the system shows. But I can double-check with produce." "You should know your own prices," the woman snapped, loud enough for the next 5 customers to hear. Taniya picked up the store phone, dialing for a price check. Brian appeared like a ghost behind her. "What's the issue?" he asked the woman, ignoring Taniya completely. "She's trying to overcharge me for honey. This is ridiculous." Brian didn't ask for context. He didn't ask what the system showed. He just turned to Taniya with a voice loud enough to echo. "Do you even know how to do a basic scan?" The air froze. Heads turned. A father holding his toddler narrowed his eyes. A college-aged couple behind the woman exchanged uncomfortable glances. Taniya opened her mouth, but the humiliation hit faster than words. Brian reached past her, scanned the jar again himself, and gave a theatrical sigh. "It's fine. I'll override it." He looked at the woman. "So sorry about the inconvenience." Then, under his breath but just loud enough, he added, "Some people just aren't used to our standards yet." The woman gave a tight, satisfied smile. Taniya felt like her spine had been ripped out. Her hands trembled slightly as she finished the transaction. No one said anything, but the silence felt heavier now. That night, she stared at the ceiling in her apartment, the lights off, trying to shake the moment. Not because it surprised her, but because it hurt more than she expected. She thought she could tough it out, Play it cool. Prove she belonged. But she hadn't been treated like someone who belonged. Not once. She considered quitting. Just walking away and leaving the uniform behind. But something in her burned too hot to let it go. No. She would stay. And she would pay attention. If there was a pattern, she'd find it. If there was a paper trail, she'd collect it. If she had to bite her tongue until it bled, so be it. But she wasn't going to let them erase her. Unseen in all the chaos, standing in aisle 4 with a reusable bag and inconspicuous hoodie, was a man no one had noticed. He'd watched the entire exchange, head slightly tilted, eyes unreadable. He didn't flinch when Brian snapped. He didn't speak when Taniya was humiliated. But he saw everything. The next day he would return. And the day after that, because the man in the hoodie wasn't just a shopper. He owned the entire chain. A mystery shopper sees it all. But nobody realizes who he really is. Elliot Kane placed a carton of almond milk on the conveyor belt, the edge of his hoodie brushing lightly against the polished side of the register. He moved slowly, deliberately, like any other customer. No rush, no eye contact. The cashier didn't look up, but he wasn't here for a smile. He was here to see what the surface tried to hide. He had built this empire, Cascade Grocers, from a college dorm dream into a national chain. No investors, no handouts, just sweat and obsession. The branding was clean, the experience elevated. It was supposed to be different, better, inclusive. That had been the mission. But lately Elliot had grown suspicious. Emails from HR painted one picture. But whispers from store-level employees, the anonymous ones, painted another. Complaints dismissed. Exit interviews scrubbed. Patterns no one dared say out loud, but everyone felt in their bones. He knew the truth didn't sit in spreadsheets. It lived on the floor in the pauses between words, in the shift of a manager's voice depending on who stood in front of them. That's why Elliot stopped coming in as Elliot. He became the shopper in the hoodie, a ghost with a grocery list. He scanned the line. Brian Decker stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, lips tight, his eyes pale and sharp, tracked Taniya Brooks with laser focus. Every time she moved, Brian's neck tensed slightly, like a hawk preparing for a dive. Taniya stood at register 3, back straight, jaw set. The air around her had a different pressure, like she was trying to breathe at a different altitude than everyone else. Elliot had seen this before, not here, but in offices, at restaurants, in elevators, in the way corporate America silently punished black women who didn't shrink themselves. Brian's phone buzzed. He glanced down, then up again at Taniya. Elliot noticed something strange. Brian smiled, actually smiled, when he turned toward a white cashier helping an elderly customer nearby. His tone shifted, warm, approachable. "Great work, Carrie," Brian called, voice suddenly full of ease. Taniya, meanwhile, was triple-checking prices on a product the system had flagged incorrectly. She held the box in her hand, clearly trying to resolve the discrepancy without causing a delay. Brian swooped in. "That's not where that goes," he barked. "Do you not read the SKU codes?" Taniya blinked. "It's scanning as out of..." "I don't care what it's scanning as. Just override it and move on. We're not here to play guess the code." Customers watched. No one said a word. Elliot's hands tightened around his shopping basket. He had designed the training modules himself, emphasized dignity, de-escalation, equity. Yet here was Brian, treating one cashier like a problem and another like a star. What struck Elliot wasn't just the harshness, it was the habit, the smoothness. Like Brian had rehearsed this tone over and over, until it became second nature. Elliot paid for his almond milk, eyes locked on Brian the entire time. The manager didn't notice. He never looked at the man in the hoodie, and that was the point. Over the next few days, Elliot came back. Different hats, different times, a baseball cap on Monday, glasses on Tuesday. He made small purchases, an energy bar, a frozen dinner, a bottle of kombucha, and always picked Taniya's line when he could. He observed everything. On Wednesday, a white customer knocked over a bottle of olive oil in Carrie's lane. Brian rushed over, laughing. "No worries, accidents happen." But when a child in Taniya's line dropped a box of crackers, Brian muttered, "Why is this always happening in your lane?" By Thursday, Elliot started taking notes in a password-locked app on his phone. Pattern 1, over-monitoring Taniya versus others. Pattern 2, tone shifts depending on race. Pattern 3, no verbal coaching. just public shaming. Pattern 4. HR reviews say Brian's store has the lowest minority retention rate. Elliot wasn't an alarmist. He had seen false alarms before. Misunderstandings. Cultural misreads. But this was deliberate. Crafted. Performative politeness for one group. Performative dominance for another. What rattled him more was how normalized it had become. Even the other staff, those who might not have meant harm, said nothing. They laughed at Brian's jokes. Laughed when he called Taniya Miss Overthink. Laughed when he suggested she smile more because it fit the brand. On Friday morning, Taniya made a minor error, accidentally scanned an item twice. Before she could correct it, Brian pounced. "You've been here almost 2 weeks and still can't handle basic functions," he said, loud enough for customers to hear. Taniya apologized quietly, as she voided the extra item. Her face didn't flinch, but her shoulders slumped, just slightly. A micro-movement, but to Elliot it screamed. No one said a word. Not her coworkers. Not the customers. Not even the woman behind her in line, who had watched the entire thing with raised brows but stayed silent. And yet again Brian walked off like he'd just handled a routine maintenance issue. Elliot stared at him, heart thudding. It wasn't just wrong, it was a system. Something buried deep beneath the polished branding and curated lighting. A culture. Elliot returned to his apartment that evening and pulled up Brian Decker's file on the internal dashboard. Years with the company, steady promotions, high-performance review. But then something odd caught Elliot's eye. The timeline didn't add up. 3 years ago, Brian had transferred from another location. A sudden move. Lateral, not upward. No promotion attached. At the same time, 3 black employees had left that store within 6 weeks. 2 of their exit interviews were missing. That was a red flag. Elliot checked the HR audit logs. Someone had manually removed the notes. But they missed one thing. One complaint had been downloaded to a separate folder, likely for backup. And it was still there. This manager treats black employees like liabilities. His language is coded, but his meaning is clear. If you don't act white, talk white, think white, you're a problem. I left for my sanity. But someone needs to pay attention. This will happen again. Elliot sat back in his chair, breath caught between fury and disbelief. It had happened again, and again, and it was still happening. He leaned forward and whispered out loud, "How many more don't get reported?" He couldn't ignore it now, and he wouldn't. But he also knew, if he moved too fast, they'd cover it up. If he came in as CEO, flashing authority, they'd go into performance mode, smile, clean up, lock down. No. He had to stay low, watch longer, make them reveal who they really were. Back in the store the next morning, Elliot stood near the self-checkout, pretending to browse protein bars. Brian was in full charm mode, with a couple buying imported cheese. But then his radio buzzed, and his face changed. Something urgent. A manager call. He walked toward the stockroom, but as he passed by Taniya's station, Elliot noticed it so small most would have missed it. Brian gave a slight smirk. Not at her. About her. It wasn't just routine disrespect anymore. It was enjoyment. Elliot felt something shift in his gut. This wasn't Brian's first time doing this. It wouldn't be his last. And suddenly, Elliot wasn't just a mystery shopper anymore. He was a fuse. Elliot notices a detail that makes him question if this is Brian's first time. Taniya's notebook wasn't fancy. Just a thin, spiral-bound pad she bought from the dollar aisle on her break. She didn't title it or date the pages. That would have felt too formal, too exposed. She just called it Nusk. But every entry mattered. Monday. Carrie asked if I brought in the ethnic snacks again. Laughed when I didn't get the joke. Tuesday. Brian changed my shift without notice. Only found out when I showed up and was told I was late. Wednesday. Everyone left for lunch. No one said a word to me. Found out later they planned it in the break room. At first she told herself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe she was just sensitive. But the feeling kept tightening around her chest, like walking into a room where everyone just stopped talking. Every day. She didn't cry. Not once. But the silence, the steady, choking silence, was worse than yelling. She didn't know someone was watching. From behind shelves. From aisles with mirrored sunglasses. From the corner of the parking lot. Elliot had committed. This was no longer about curiosity. It was about patterns. Systems that thrived because they kept people like Taniya isolated, doubting themselves. He wore different outfits every day. Sometimes khakis, sometimes jeans, baseball hats, beanies, neutral expression, always alone, always unnoticed. He didn't need cameras. He needed truth. And the truth was getting uglier. Brian never missed a chance to nitpick Taniya. He once scolded her for the volume of her voice when greeting customers, then praised another cashier the next day for being so upbeat. When Taniya suggested moving a slower-selling item to an end-cap display, Brian said, "Let's leave the strategy to people who know the brand." But what Elliot noticed most wasn't Brian, it was everyone else. The other employees laughed at Brian's comments like background noise. They didn't say the words, but their body language did. Stay small. Blend in. Don't speak. And then there was Marcus. Marcus was a delivery driver. Black. Mid-40s. Quiet. Carried himself like someone who'd seen too much and expected little. He'd been making early morning deliveries for 3 years. He didn't talk to anyone until he saw Taniya crying in the stockroom. She wiped her face fast. Tried to act like she was reading labels. Marcus leaned against a stack of crates, arms folded. "Don't waste your tears on this place." She laughed bitterly. Just having a moment, Marcus looked at her like he was remembering something too old to be said out loud. "You won't last if you don't play dumb," he said. Taniya frowned. "Excuse me, you heard me." He nodded toward the manager's office. "That man up there, he don't care if you work hard. He just wants you to act like you're lucky to be here." Taniya folded her arms. "So you're saying I should smile and stay quiet while they walk all over me?" "I'm saying," Marcus said quietly, "that the ones who talk don't stay long, and the ones who stay, they stop talking." He walked out before she could reply. That night, she added a new note. "Thursday." Marcus said the quiet ones survive. But is surviving the goal? Meanwhile, Elliot sat in his apartment with a digital wall of faces, reports and timestamps. He'd built a private system to track every store's HR complaints. It wasn't supposed to be accessed like this, but being the owner had its privileges. When he searched for Brian's name, the list came up short. Too short. Taniya hadn't filed a formal complaint yet. He knew that. But even before her, the number of reported incidents under Brian's management was suspiciously low. Then Elliot searched another name. Dante Holloway. Dante had worked in the exact same role as Taniya at another Cascade store, where Brian used to manage before his transfer. He found Dante's resignation form. It was clean, polite. But Elliot dug deeper. He found an archived file in an older HR database, one that hadn't been ported over during the system update. Buried, forgotten, ignored. Complaint 20. Consistent pattern of public criticism, shift manipulation, and racial bias from store manager Brian Decker. Suggested I adjust my tone and be more culturally appropriate. Refused to escalate my concerns. I was told not to be so sensitive. Elliot stared at the words for a long time. The phrases were too familiar. He opened Taniya's last few days of shift reports. Brian had changed her hours 3 times. Each time she had to scramble for transportation. Each time he logged it as employee request. Flat out lie. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a cycle. Taniya's resilience was rare, but she was being tested every single hour. Elliot watched her face during shifts. Her eyes scanned constantly, reading the room, checking for sabotage. She bagged groceries like they might explode if she made one wrong move. And she smiled. Always smiled. Even when they didn't deserve it. Elliot knew what came next. He'd seen it happen before. The weight would pile up until she broke, or left. Either way, Brian would win. Again. Unless someone flipped the script. The next morning, Taniya arrived early. Not to impress anyone, but because the pressure had kept her from sleeping. She stood at her register before anyone else. Alone in the silence. Brian walked by. Didn't greet her. Just looked at her clipboard and adjusted a number. No explanation. Taniya didn't ask why. She simply wrote it down. The notebook now had 17 pages. Later that day, Elliot walked through the snack aisle, pretending to browse trail mix. He heard Brian chatting with Carrie, near the break room. His tone was light, approving. He called her sharp and reliable. Then he said something that made Elliot stop mid-step. "Wish we had more like you," Brian chuckled. "Instead of people trying to make everything about race and sensitivity." Carrie laughed. "I know, right?" Elliot didn't move. He memorized the words, burned them into memory. The next hour, Brian reprimanded Taniya for having her phone out. She was checking the time because the wall clock was broken. He made a scene. Again. Taniya said nothing, But that night, she added another entry to the notebook. Friday. Brian publicly shamed me for something Carrie does daily. No one said anything. Elliot opened the HR server again. He typed in a new query. Brian Decker, complaint suppression history. He expected to find 1 or 2 suspicious deletions. He found 7. 7 complaints from black employees had been marked resolved with no follow-up forms, no exit interviews. 3 employees had left within 60 days of filing. 1 had no record of ever working there. Her name had been deleted entirely. But 1 file hadn't been deleted. It had simply been archived to the wrong department. An old case. The same store. Same manager. Same exact phrases. Told I don't fit the brand. Punished for tone. Made to feel disposable. Elliot sat back in his chair, eyes wide. The timestamp was 4 years ago. Different city. Different cashier. But it read like Taniya's story word for word. He didn't know what infuriated him more. The precision or the predictability. Brian wasn't just problematic. He was trained. This wasn't personality. It was policy disguised as preference. And someone, maybe more than one person, had been protecting him. Elliot picked up his phone. He wasn't calling HR. He was calling legal. Because this was bigger than a bad manager. This was a systemic failure, and it was going to unravel. Elliot finds an old report about a former black employee, and it's nearly identical. The break room smelled like overused coffee filters and microwaved lasagna. Faded motivational posters clung to beige walls like afterthoughts. Taniya rarely ate in here, not because she didn't have time, but because the room felt like a silent test, one where she was always the wrong answer. But today she came in early. Her stomach had been in knots since the morning shift was posted. Brian had scheduled her for 6 consecutive closing shifts, something no one else had received. She wasn't supposed to work that late every day. Not per company policy, but policy didn't mean much in this place. She sat down in the far corner with her water bottle and sandwich, earbuds in, but no music playing, just insulation. At first the room was quiet. Then came the door. Click. In walked Brian, followed by Carrie and another senior cashier, Adam, a tall, freckled guy, who always talked like he was narrating a podcast. None of them noticed her. Or maybe they didn't care. They stood near the coffee machine, backs to her. Close enough that every word landed clear and sharp. And I swear if I have to explain another basic process to her, I'm going to lose it, Brian said, chuckling. You mean Taniya? Adam asked, laughing lightly. Who else, Brian said. She moves like molasses and acts like we should be grateful she showed up. Carrie snorted. It's the braids for me. Like, okay, we get it. Cultural expression or whatever. Brian leaned in. Honestly, feels like we hired her to check a box. You know, make the store look diverse. Diversity decoration, Adam added, laughing. Taniya froze. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs. Her sandwich sat untouched. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly. Her knuckles ached. Don't say that too loud, Carrie whispered, mockingly. You'll get cancelled. Brian chuckled again. Please. She's too scared to say anything. All bark, no bite. Taniya's hand moved instinctively. She slid her phone from her apron pocket, unlocked it under the table, and hit the voice memos app. Her thumb shook as she tapped record. The words kept flowing. Don't even get me started on the attitude, Brian said. Always with the eyes. Like we owe her something. Should have gone with the other girl we interviewed, Adam muttered. She actually smiled. Brian lowered his voice. I told HR that. But you know how it is, optics. Taniya's heart thudded. Blood roared in her ears. She stared at the table, willing herself not to cry, not to move, not to breathe too loudly. Her phone sat on her lap, screen dimming. The voices were clear, unfiltered. When the microwave beeped, she jumped. Brian turned slightly but didn't look back. They were still too caught up in themselves to notice. The moment they left casually, carelessly, Taniya ended the recording, renamed the file Break Room 2:07 p.m., and uploaded it to a locked private drive in her email. She didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the shift. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The audio played in her head on repeat. Every syllable, a hammer to her chest. Not because she didn't know this was how they saw her, but because now, finally, she had But what could she do? Go to the same HR that had buried complaints before? The same HR that never once followed up on her questions about the handbook? If she submitted this, would they act? Or would they paint her as vindictive? Her phone buzzed. A message from her cousin. How's the new job? Still dealing with those microaggressions? Taniya stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Micro? Nah. This place speaks fluent racism. Then she deleted the message. Instead, she wrote, hanging in there. Across town, Elliot was staring at a spreadsheet glowing in the dark. Names. Exit dates. Resignation reason. Every employee of color who left within 90 days had the same coded phrases, didn't feel like a culture fit, needed stronger soft skills, unable to adapt to team dynamics. He pulled up the voice memo Taniya didn't know he now had access to, thanks to a back-end alert he built that monitored keyword triggers in store-level recordings, a protocol designed to detect slurs and harassment, rarely used, until now. The memo's contents made Elliot's stomach turn. Diversity decoration. Check a box. Cultural expression or whatever. He'd heard slanted language before. But this was naked. Dehumanizing. And from a manager. He didn't need a task force. He needed to act. Still, he wasn't ready to confront Brian outright. Not yet. If he came in heavy-handed, they'd circle the wagons. Deny. Lawyer up. Play victim. Elliot had seen it before. But if he baited Brian gently, publicly, maybe he'd reveal himself in front of others. So Elliot planned a test. The next morning, he walked into the store wearing business casual dress shirt, slacks, leather shoes. Clean-shaven, not his usual disguise. He grabbed a high-end cheese platter, a bottle of wine, and some imported chocolates. Premium customer energy. He headed to Register 3. Taniya was there. She recognized him this time. Their eyes met briefly. Her look was guarded, polite, but Elliot noticed the faint bruising under her eyes. Not physical, emotional. Sleeplessness, exhaustion, hypervigilance. He placed the items on the belt, then casually said, I think this was marked incorrectly. Can you check that price? Taniya checked the tag. The system showed. She raised a brow. That's the listed price, sir. Elliot nodded. Could you check with someone in wine to be sure? She started to reach for the phone. That's when Brian appeared, almost like he'd been waiting. What's the issue here? He asked sharply, eyes locked on Taniya. She's helping me confirm the price, Elliot said calmly, not looking at Brian. Brian didn't acknowledge him. He pointed to the screen. That's the correct price. Why are you wasting time? Taniya opened her mouth. Brian cut her off. Customers shouldn't have to wait, because you're uncertain about basic procedures. Elliot looked up slowly. Actually, he said, voice smooth but firm. She was doing exactly what I asked. You should probably let her finish. Brian's jaw clenched. I'm the manager on duty, sir. Elliot smiled slightly. Are you? Brian blinked. Something about the tone made him hesitate. Taniya stayed silent, but her fingers curled against the edge of the register. Elliot reached into his wallet, pulled out a sleek black card, and placed it gently on the counter. Brian's eyes twitched. Cascade's executive signature card. The kind only issued to board-level personnel. I'm just a shopper, Elliot said, voice neutral. But I like knowing how your team handles pressure. Brian's smile faltered. Of course. I didn't realize. No reason you should have, Elliot interrupted. That's the point. He took his receipt, nodded at Taniya, and walked out without another word. Taniya stood frozen for several seconds after he left. She wasn't sure what just happened, or who he really was. But for the first time she felt seen. Brian, on the other hand, looked like someone had just told him the cameras were still rolling. Because they were. And Elliot wasn't finished. Elliot stages a minor incident at checkout. Brian's reaction is everything. The store was buzzing. Saturday mornings at Cascade Grocers were always a theater of perfection. Shiny carts, polished displays, aromas of fresh bread wafting through the air. Employees moved with rehearsed smiles and smooth efficiency, and Brian Decker strutted like the director of it all. Taniya had learned to blend into the noise. Her motions were precise now. Bags perfectly folded, voice warm but not too much. Still, she carried the weight of that break room recording in her apron pocket like a loaded gun. She hadn't reported it. Not yet. She needed time. A plan. Proof that someone, anyone, would listen. What she didn't know was that Elliot Kane was already 10 steps ahead. This time, he dressed down again. Dark hoodie, jeans, inconspicuous sneakers. No executive card. No polished edge. Just another face in the weekend crowd. His eyes scanned the store, studying how people moved around Taniya like she was furniture, always there, never noticed. He paused in front of the wine display. His hand hovered over a bottle of Chianti. Then, he let it slip. It hit the tile with a shattering crash, the dark red liquid, blooming across the white floor like spilled blood. Heads turned, customers gasped. A cashier shrieked. Taniya, just 3 feet away, flinched and turned instinctively toward the mess. Before she could take a single step, Brian stormed out of his office like a heat-seeking missile. "What did you do?" he barked. Taniya froze. "It wasn't. You're assigned to this section today, aren't you?" "I was stocking paper bags. I didn't." "You left the display too close to the edge, and now we've got glass and wine all over the floor," he snapped, voice rising. People stopped shopping, phones came out. Eyes shifted. Elliot stood off to the side, silent, watching, recording. "I need accountability," Brian barked. "You've been careless all week, and now this? Do you realize the liability this creates?" Taniya's hands trembled. "I didn't touch that shelf." "Don't argue," Brian interrupted, pointing at her like a prosecutor. "Clean it up, now." It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Sharp, cold, dehumanizing, and loud enough for half the store to hear. A young woman by the freezer aisle lifted her phone, subtle but deliberate. She tapped record. Taniya bent down, slowly, grabbing paper towels from a nearby rack. Her cheeks burned. Her dignity peeled away with every soaked blot of wine and glass. Brian turned away without a second glance. "And Elliot?" He stepped forward. He looked at Taniya, just for a second, long enough for her to register recognition in his eyes. Not pity, not surprise, witness. Then he walked out the front doors. Hoodie up. 30 minutes later, the video was on TikTok. The caption: "Manager humiliates black cashier over something she didn't do. Watch the guy in the hoodie." It hit 30,000 views in the first hour. By midnight, it crossed 4. No one knew who the man in the hoodie was. No one could identify him. But everyone had an opinion about Brian. The comments exploded. "This is textbook racism. Look how he speaks to her. She literally didn't do anything, and got treated like trash. Y'all see the guy in the hoodie? I feel like he knew something." Inside Cascade's corporate servers, keywords triggered a notification. Racist manager video. Black employee mistreatment. Public embarrassment at Cascade Grocers. HR was alerted. So was legal. But before they could respond, Elliot submitted an anonymous email to the internal audit team. Attached were the timestamps, a detailed account of Brian's shift patterns, notes on prior complaints, screenshots of suppressed reports, and one chilling subject line: "The pattern you've been ignoring." At the store, things moved fast. Brian called Taniya into his office Monday morning. He didn't apologize. He didn't even mention the video. Just printed a suspension form and slid it across the desk. "You're being placed on administrative leave pending investigation," he said coolly. "This is standard procedure when public attention interferes with store operations." Taniya stared at the paper. "So I'm being punished for being humiliated?" Brian shrugged. "It's out of my hands. Corporate's looking into it." She wanted to scream, laugh, cry, all at once. Instead, she stood up. "I've done everything this store asked me to do," she said quietly. "And you've done everything to make me regret it." Brian's expression didn't change. "That'll be all," he said. She left the room without another word. She didn't cry until she reached the parking lot. "And Elliot?" He sat in his home office, watching the internal employee dashboard flicker. A red dot marked the store as under audit. Taniya's profile now had a note: "Leave pending further review." But it wasn't enough. He picked up his phone, dialed a number only a few at the company knew, and said, "Check every exit interview from the last 12 months at Brian Decker's locations. I want names, dates, recordings, and raw data. No summary." On the other end, the audit director replied, "Understood, sir." Still, Elliot stayed anonymous for now. The TikTok video kept climbing. News outlets started circling. That Tuesday, a call came into the store line. Carrie answered. "Cascade Grocers. This is Carrie speaking. How can I help you?" A voice replied, calm and professional. "Yes, hi. I'm a reporter with the Atlanta Ledger. We're running a story on the viral video showing a Cascade manager berating a black cashier. Can I speak to the manager on duty?" Carrie blinked. Brian was standing 10 feet away. She covered the receiver. Brian," she said cautiously. "You've got a call. It's a reporter." Brian's smile faded for the first time all week. He stepped forward, took the phone slowly. "This is Brian." The reporter didn't waste time. "I'm reaching out for comment regarding the video from Saturday. The footage shows you blaming a cashier for a broken bottle and berating her in front of customers. Would you like to provide your side before we go to print?" Brian swallowed hard. His voice, for once, stuttered. I wasn't aware the video had reached the media." The reporter paused. "So that's a no comment." Brian looked around the store, and for the first time, he looked small. A reporter calls the store asking about the racist manager video. The screen glowed in the dim kitchen. Brian Decker stared, disbelief etched on his face, as the TikTok view counter climbed. 20K, 50K, 150K. It hit 600,000 views in under 20. Each tap was a blow, each share a public verdict. The store felt different. The usual Saturday bustle had been replaced by urgent conversations. Whispers near the floral section, nervous glances at the front entrance, frantic texts. News crews buzzed outside, asking for statements beyond the thin, corporate-approved line. "We are taking the allegations seriously." Public pressure metastasized overnight. Local activists rallied outside the store, chanting for justice. On social media, hashtags like Sand with Taniya and Tascade Grocers Exposed trended. The company's official response was vague. "We are investigating and have zero tolerance for discrimination," but performative enough to meet expectations while revealing nothing. Taniya watched it all from home. Her phone pinged incessantly. Direct messages poured in. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. You deserve better. Full-time cashier myself. Same thing happened to me." They came from past employees, ghosted voices now finding safe corners to share. "He did this to me too," one wrote. Another, "I left after 2 weeks because I couldn't handle the tone." Taniya didn't know what to say. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was looking for confirmation that it wasn't her fault, and this was it. The silent solidarity of people using screen to reach across pain. Meanwhile, Elliot watched from afar. His anonymous email had landed in the inbox of the internal audit team. It was forwarded to the board, exactly where he'd intended. No names, no cameras, no leaks, just facts, broken HR processes, hidden reports, repeated patterns. But the board's attention meant nothing if Brian spun his narrative first. And he did. On a live-streamed local talk show, Brian sat at a makeshift desk. He looked composed, overly composed. "I'm baffled," he told the host. "This has blown up into cancel culture gone mad. We're talking about one unfortunate incident, taken out of context. But now people think it's systematic. If professionalism means silence culture, count me out." In the background, an HR representative squirmed in his chair. Brian's words were rehearsed. His tone deflected, not remorse but resentment. He framed himself as the victim of modern outrage. That twist, shifting the spotlight from the harassed to the harasser, sparked outrage. Most saw through it, but it complicated things. Not everyone believed the camera told the full truth. Some whispered online, "Where's the other side of the story?" Back at home, Elliot's assistant pinged him with an urgent note. "Hidden files discovered. You need to see this." Because buried deep in the HR system, far deeper than Brian's prior deletion trail, lay something unexpected. A set of exit interviews labeled confidential, never archived, from 3 former white employees, who had also left under vague cultural fit complaints. Their wording matched too closely to be coincidence. Leadership was unpredictable, made me feel ostracized. Subtle changes in scheduling punished me without cause. I left because the environment stopped being supportive. Only these weren't hidden. They'd simply been logged differently, not resolved, not erased, just filed in a benign category, never investigated. It wasn't just black employees being harmed. Everyone was. This wasn't just racism. This was a culture broken by power. A system tiptoed around the mess. A belief that surface metrics, happy customers, clean floors were all that mattered. Elliot's assistant noted one more thing, the archived complaint from the woman who left 4 years ago. Dante Holloway had its timestamp still active in a backup server. It meant it could be restored. Elliot swallowed. Someone had tried to bury that. Intentionally. The magnitude punched his gut. As night fell, he drafted another anonymous package. A merged dossier. Time-stamped complaints of all races. The break room voice memo. Brian's media deflection. Plus the internal inconsistencies. He marked it urgent, risk to brand integrity beyond legal exposure. He hit send. And then he watched how the world spun. Because stories grow roots when they feed on contradiction. The public who had seen two sides suddenly had more. On social media, reactions splintered. Some posted, "Clearly everyone stood up eventually." Others, "This isn't about Brian being racist. It's about toxic leadership." Still others, "If whites are leaving, then the problem is worse than we thought." Corporate sent out another memo. Cascade Grocers has engaged a third-party investigator and will conduct a full cultural audit. It was progress, but still limp. Elliot leaned back in his office chair. The assistant's message echoed, something hidden, and that thought lingered. Brian, meanwhile, paced his living room. He didn't anticipate this. He thought he could ride the wave. He thought he controlled the narrative. He didn't see the undercurrents, those unspoken truths, that now threatened everything. Elliot watched his phone's screen one more time. Reports were still coming in. Maps of exits, charts of internal heat, social trends, media tracking. Then he saw the phrase, "key trigger pulled," the code he used when audit escalated to board-level confidential. He closed his eyes. The fire was no longer contained. It was about to burn the whole structure down, because someone had seen the pattern. And now, everyone would. Elliot's assistant discovers something in the HR system, and it's been hidden. The spreadsheet looked clean, too clean. Elliot Kane sat in the dim light of his private office, his fingers drumming the desk as his assistant, Jonah, mirrored the data on a shared screen. Across 2 decades in business, Elliot had learned to trust one thing above all. What people try to hide reveals who they really are. Jonah had spent the last 48 hours combing through Cascade's HR systems, not just the active databases, but the archived backups, the fail-safe servers, the error-stamped files no one was supposed to open. What he found wasn't just negligence. It was a cover-up. "Sir," Jonah said quietly, eyes locked on the monitor, "I've recovered 23 complaints, all deleted, all involving the same manager, Brian Decker." Elliot leaned forward. Jonah scrolled through the digital folder. Most of the complaints were submitted by Black employees, all dated between the last 3 years since Brian's promotion to regional manager. Each report varied slightly in tone, in detail, but the core threads were unmistakable. Was passed over for a promotion, despite being told I was next in line. He told me my energy was too urban for the brand. Every time I spoke up, I lost hours on the schedule. He told me I didn't fit the culture. Other employees openly mocked me, and he laughed along. One complaint had been marked urgent. The system showed it had been routed to HR with a response pending. But there was no response. Elliot's jaw tightened. Check who was looped in. Jonah clicked the metadata tab. 4 names appeared. All HR leadership. And all of them had marked the complaint as reviewed. No further action. Elliot closed his eyes briefly. "You see it, don't you?" Jonah nodded. They didn't just ignore it. They shut it down. Every report followed a similar arc. Escalation, silence, disappearance. A paper trail with burned edges. And Brian had kept rising. It wasn't incompetence. It was design. And it wasn't just Brian anymore. It was the system around him. Meanwhile, Taniya sat curled on her apartment couch, knees pulled to her chest, laptop open on her lap. The backlash hadn't stopped. Strangers flooded her DMs with support, solidarity, even job offers. But the messages that hit hardest were the quiet ones, like the one she received that morning. It came from a private account. "I was his assistant manager in 2020. He ruined my life." Attached was a voice memo. Taniya hesitated. Her thumb hovered over the play button. Then she pressed it. The voice was a woman's, clear, exhausted, trembling with memories that hadn't faded. "I filed a complaint after he made a joke about me needing a little more polish. I had a master's degree. He made it his mission to push me out, started scheduling me on holidays, assigned me closing shifts, even though I was salaried. When I escalated, HR told me I was being emotional. I left after 7 months. I lost everything." Taniya sat frozen. Her notebook lay beside her. 17 pages of documented microaggressions, shift changes, silences, and dismissals. For weeks she'd questioned if she was overreacting. Now she knew. She was underreacting. Back at corporate, Elliot stared at the screen. "These names," he said to Jonah. "These voices. They never had a chance." Jonah hesitated. "What do we do?" Elliot didn't answer right away. He thought of his younger self. How he built Cascade on the belief that leadership didn't need to mirror injustice to be profitable. He believed a company could be a place of dignity. That was the promise, and now, that promise was cracking. We expose it, Elliot said finally. All of it. Jonah raised a brow. Publicly? Elliot shook his head. Not yet. The board needs to know first. But when we do go public, it won't be sanitized. No corporate gloss. Just the truth. He stood up and walked to the floor-length window. Below, the city buzzed, cars slicing through intersections. Pedestrians moving in patterns, unaware that somewhere above them, a reckoning was being planned. Elliot pulled out his phone. He opened a secure app and recorded a message. To the Cascade board. This is Elliot Kane. I'm sending you a set of documents that will disturb you, and they should. The integrity of this company has been compromised, not by a single manager, but by a system that allowed his behavior to fester. I've remained anonymous until now to observe the truth unfiltered. But effective immediately, I am stepping into full oversight. My identity will remain undisclosed to store leadership until further notice. Do not contact me. Just read the files and decide who you want to be. He hit send. Within seconds, 20 board members received encrypted packages. Inside, a full PDF dossier of Brian's behavior, linked timestamps, voice memos, erased complaint logs, whistleblower statements, including Jonah's summary analysis that revealed a pattern of strategic employee isolation. It read like a crime novel, but every word was real. At the same time, Jonah's system pinged. An automated alert flagged one more item. It was a calendar invite, set for the following Monday. Title: Quarterly HR Check-In. Region Host: Brian Decker. Guest list: 3 HR managers, 1 legal rep. Topic: Proactive narrative alignment for viral incident response. Jonah blinked. He turned to Elliot. You're not going to believe this. Elliot leaned in. Jonah read the title aloud. Elliot let out a bitter chuckle. They're trying to spin it. They're calling it a narrative. Elliot's voice dropped. They think this is PR. It was time. He wouldn't confront Brian in private. That gave him too much control. He'd confront him where it hurt the most. Inside the world he thought he ruled. In front of the very employees he dismissed. But not yet. The board needed to finish reading. The company needed to absorb the scale. And Brian still didn't know who the man in the hoodie was. Or that he'd watched every move. Every smile. Every lie. Because Elliot Kane was no longer observing. He was preparing. Elliot makes his identity known to the board. But not to Brian. Monday morning arrived, wrapped in the illusion of normalcy. The floors at Cascade Grocers gleamed. Background jazz trickled through hidden speakers. Employees clocked in with practiced expressions, nodding at each other like nothing had changed, even though everything had. Taniya stood outside the building, heart racing. She hadn't been officially reinstated, but her inbox had received a cryptic message that morning. You may want to come in today, 10 a.m. Don't be late. No signature. No sender. She stared at the glass entrance for a full 10 seconds before pushing through. She expected stares, whispers. Maybe someone would ask what she was doing there. But no one said anything. And that silence, once so isolating, now felt like anticipation. Inside, Elliot Kane walked through the front doors of his own store. No hoodie. No disguise. No anonymity. Today, he wore a crisp navy blazer, over a charcoal shirt, no tie. He moved with quiet authority, eyes scanning every corner of the store with surgical focus. To most, he looked like any regional executive, another polished outsider dropping in to observe. Except this time, he was the one holding the scalpel. He paused near the produce section. Employees moved faster when they saw him. Some greeted him with overdone smiles. Others avoided his gaze. But Elliot wasn't here to judge the floor. He was here to expose the rot beneath it. In the back office, Brian stood at the mirror, adjusting his collar. His phone buzzed, group text from Carrie and Adam. Big wig in the building. Look sharp. Is that the guy from regional? Hope he likes the diversity upgrades. Lol. Brian smirked. He'd weathered the storm. The story had already shifted. Corporate hadn't fired him. The investigation? Just a formality. He'd even suggested a few cosmetic changes, highlighted a few black-owned brands in the snack aisle, scheduled a DEA workshop next month. Optics. Easy win. When he stepped onto the floor and saw Elliot, he misread everything. Hey there, Brian said, extending a hand. You must be with corporate. Brian Decker, store manager here. Welcome. Elliot looked at the hand, then at the man. Appreciate it, he said calmly. I'm calling a staff meeting. Now. Brian blinked. Now. Elliot turned to the nearest employee and nodded. Can you let everyone know? Floor team. Registers. Backstock. 15 minutes. The woman hesitated, then nodded and walked off. Brian watched, confusion creeping across his features. Mind telling me what this is about? We've had some restructuring recently, but things are stabilizing. Elliot didn't respond. He simply walked toward the center of the store. 15 minutes later, every employee stood near the customer service counter. Some whispered quietly. Others kept eyes on Brian, who stood beside Elliot like a proud tour guide, arms folded. Taniya slipped in last, still unsure whether she was welcome. Carrie clocked her immediately, smirked, nudged Adam. Brian cleared his throat and stepped forward, assuming command. Thanks everyone for gathering on short notice, he began, projecting confidence. I want to start by acknowledging the past few weeks have been challenging, but I'm proud of how this team has responded. Murmurs. A few nods. Brian continued. We've implemented a few new procedures, diversity initiatives, stronger communication protocols. I've personally spoken with corporate and believe we're setting a great example. Elliot's voice cut through like a blade. Stop. Brian turned, startled. Excuse me? Elliot stepped forward facing the team. His voice was calm, even, but it carried. My name is Elliot Kane. Silent, one cashier whispered. Wait. The Elliot Kane? Elliot scanned the crowd. I'm the founder and owner of Cascade Grocers. A ripple of shock swept the room. Brian's eyes widened. His body stiffened. Elliot continued. I've spent the last month observing this location. Not as a CEO, not as a name on your paychecks, but as a customer, a silent witness. I watched how you treated each other. I watched how your manager spoke to his staff. I watched who got protected and who got punished. He turned toward Taniya. She was humiliated, lied about, suspended. Then he turned back to the group. And not just her. Over the past 3 years, multiple complaints from Black employees have been erased, ignored or buried. Promotions denied, voices dismissed, cultures labeled as unprofessional. These aren't accidents, they're choices. A few employees looked at their shoes. Brian stepped forward, voice trembling slightly. With all due respect, Mr. Kane, you're speaking out of turn. This store runs smoothly. We've had isolated. Elliot raised a hand. No. You've had patterns. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded document. This is a printout of every complaint made under your leadership that was deleted or hidden. Every one of them involving race. Every one of them marked reviewed by HR, with no follow-up. He handed it to the nearest employee, an older Black woman from the bakery who had worked there for 5 years. Read it, Elliot said gently. Pass it around. The woman took it silently, eyes scanning the first lines. Brian tried again. You're blowing this out of proportion. We've made real improvements. Our recent audit was triggered by a video, Elliot interrupted. Not by your leadership. He let the words settle. You only acted when you were caught. And your improvements? They were never about change, just containment. Carrie whispered something to Adam, who suddenly looked pale. Taniya stood still, unreadable. And Elliot, still calm, stepped forward, eyes fixed on Brian. You once told someone they didn't fit the culture. Do you remember that? Brian didn't answer. Good, Elliot said. Because today we're changing the culture. He turned to the group. There will be changes to management. There will be an audit of all stores. There will be accountability. Brian's mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. Wait. Are you firing? Elliot raised a single finger and said one sentence. You no longer speak for this company. Elliot steps forward and says one sentence that freezes the room. The words hung in the air like thunder. You no longer speak for this company. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then, as if a veil had been torn down, the atmosphere in the store shifted. Gasps rippled through the group. Disbelief, shock, and for some, quiet vindication. The energy in the room snapped like a cable under pressure. A cashier dropped the clipboard she'd been holding. Someone in the back whispered, Did he just say what I think he said? Brian stood frozen. His face turned the color of wet paper. Mr. Kane, he stammered, this is highly unorthodox. I believe you're making a mistake. There's a process for these kinds of concerns. Elliot didn't flinch. And that process was corrupted the moment you made this place hostile to the people you didn't like. He motioned to the chairs lined up along the customer service desk. Everyone, please have a seat. Except you, Brian. The employees slowly sank into their seats, exchanging nervous looks. Taniya stood in the back, hesitant, until Elliot caught her gaze and nodded gently. She sat. Brian remained standing, jaw clenched, eyes darting. Elliot walked to the podium near the help desk and tapped a button on the store's intercom speaker. A soft beep rang out, followed by the familiar click of a Bluetooth connection syncing to the speaker system. I want you all to hear something, Elliot said. He pulled out his phone, navigated to a file, and pressed play. It was the TikTok video, the now infamous moment caught on a customer's phone, the shattering wine bottle, the rush to blame, and Brian's voice, loud and patronizing. Clean it up, now. The audio crackled through the store speakers. No one breathed. From her seat, Taniya looked down at her hands. She'd replayed that moment in her head, dozens of times, but hearing it through store speakers, broadcast in a space where she'd once been silenced, hit differently. It felt like truth finally stood taller than shame. When the audio ended, Elliot looked around. This is the moment the world saw who we really were, he said. Not because it was new, but because it was finally visible. Brian scoffed. That video was edited. Out of context. You can't make decisions off a social media clip. Elliot raised his hand again. And what about this one? He scrolled to a second file and tapped play. This time, the voice was unmistakably Brian's, along with Carrie and Adam, in the break room, laughing without restraint. Diversity decoration. She moves like molasses. Cultural expression or whatever. She's too scared to speak up. The room went cold. Even those who had once laughed along with Brian, now looked at him like a stranger. Brian's eyes widened. You recorded? That's illegal. It wasn't me, Elliot cut in. But it doesn't have to be legal to be revealing. He paused, letting the silence drag out. That's how you talk about your own staff. Behind closed doors, while smiling to their faces. Brian's posture shifted from defiant to defensive. Everyone jokes around. That was private. It was just talk. Elliot snapped his fingers, silencing him again. Do you think I built this company on just talk? Do you think the culture we advertise of excellence, equality, and integrity is a joke? No answer. Elliot took a deep breath and turned back to the seated employees. For years, some of you have been surviving in silence, made to feel disposable, gaslit, passed over, and I didn't know. I take responsibility for that. I was too high up, too far removed, but not anymore. He looked back at Brian. Because now I see what happens when leadership hides behind metrics. You build a store that's clean on the outside and rotting on the inside. Carrie's hands fidgeted in her lap. Adam's eyes stared at the floor. Elliot reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a small remote. He pressed a button. Behind him, the large flat screen normally used for promotions lit up. A familiar video call interface blinked into view. The screen read, "Connecting to HR, Cascade National." Brian's shoulders stiffened. Elliot turned slightly to the crowd. We'll be joined shortly by the very HR team that reviewed and deleted your complaints. Live. He turned to Brian again. Would you like to say anything before they join? Brian's voice was tight. You're putting on a show. This isn't justice, it's public shaming. Elliot's tone was firm. No. It's public truth. Brian opened his mouth, but the chime of the video call connecting cut him off. Three faces appeared on screen. HR VP, Laura Benton. Director of Ethics, Omar Green. Regional Compliance Lead, Jackie Shaw. They all wore expressions that tried and failed to mask discomfort. Good morning, Elliot said. You're live with the Cascade Grocers flagship team in Atlanta. The store currently under investigation for multiple, corroborated incidents of racial discrimination. The room was dead silent. The HR team nodded. We're aware, Mr. Kane, Laura began, her voice strained. Our internal review was manipulated, Elliot interrupted. By your approval of hidden complaints. By your lack of follow-up on racial harassment claims. By your refusal to confront Brian Decker until a viral video forced your hand. He stepped aside slightly so that the screen faced the staff. These are the people who were supposed to protect you. Omar adjusted his glasses. We didn't know about the break room recording. Because you weren't listening, Elliot said flatly. Brian stepped forward now, desperate. This is out of protocol. You can't just... I can, Elliot said calmly. Because I own this place. He calls HR leadership onto a video call. The video screen blinked. Three faces: Laura Benton, Omar Green, Jackie Shaw, stared out across the stunned silence of the store floor, flanked by shelf-stable pastas and a refrigerated end cap ironically marked "Fresh Starts." Elliot Kane stepped aside, giving the entire employee team a clear view of the very people responsible for upholding the values Cascade Grocers claimed to be built on. For years, these executives had operated in polished isolation: clean desks, calibrated emails, and compliance dashboards. But today, their decisions were being played out live, on speaker, in a store they had never once visited. Brian Decker stood a few feet away from the monitor, sweat pooling along his collar, his face caught in an involuntary twitch of disbelief. "Let's begin," Elliot said. He motioned to the screen. "HR team, your system logged 23 complaints across 3 years. Most were deleted or marked as reviewed with no action. Can you explain how that's possible?" Omar shifted uncomfortably. "We rely on regional leadership to escalate the ones that require more scrutiny. If a manager provides context, sometimes a complaint can be resolved at store level." "And what if the manager is the complaint?" Elliot asked sharply. Jackie Shaw chimed in, voice tight. "In those cases, we escalate, but only with sufficient documentation." Elliot's eyes narrowed. "You received audio from a former employee. You received multiple complaints using nearly identical language, and yet there was no escalation. Why?" Laura Benton finally spoke, her voice the polished calm of someone who'd survived more than a few corporate interrogations. "We made the wrong judgment," she said. "We believed the situation was contained." "No," Elliot replied. "You believed it wouldn't go public." A murmur rippled through the employees. Brian stepped in, eyes flickering to the screen. "I kept you all informed. I filed reports. I was told to maintain control at the store level." Jackie responded before thinking. "Brian, we asked you to document, not delete." The moment hung in the air like a fuse catching flame. Elliot turned to the employees. "You see what happens when the chain of accountability breaks? People don't get corrected, they get protected." Then he looked directly at the screen. "I want a full internal audit. Every location, every complaint. I want them pulled, reviewed, and analyzed independently. Not by your team, by outside counsel." Laura nodded slowly. "We can make that happen." "I'm not asking," Elliot said. "Make it happen today." Silence. Then Jackie blinked, swallowed, and closed her laptop. The screen flickered. Her window disappeared from the call. "She just left the call," Omar muttered, surprised. Elliot kept his eyes on the screen. "Is she resigning?" Laura didn't answer, but they all knew. That was the first fall, and more were coming. Elliot stepped closer to the staff. "Before I make any final decisions, there's someone who deserves to speak." He turned to Taniya. Her breath caught. The room turned to her. Every nerve in her body screamed to sink into the floor, to disappear. But Elliot's nod was steady, kind, not commanding, inviting. Taniya stood slowly. Her hands trembled at first, then steadied. She looked at Brian, then the HR team, then her coworkers. Some guilty, some indifferent, some quietly supportive. Then finally, she looked at Elliot. "I didn't want this attention," she said quietly. "I came here because I needed a paycheck. I stayed because I thought I could prove myself." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. "I tried to follow every rule. I smiled when I wasn't happy. I stayed late. I didn't speak up when I was mocked, excluded, corrected for things others got away with." She paused, inhaled. "I wrote everything down, not because I thought it would matter, but because I needed to believe it wasn't in my head." Carrie shifted in her seat. Adam looked away. Brian's face was rigid, masked. Taniya continued. "Then one day he embarrassed me in front of the entire store, and when I thought that was the worst of it, I heard them laugh about me in the break room, like I was an object, a symbol, a prop." She turned to the screen. "You didn't protect me. You protected him. And I'm not the only one." Elliot's face didn't flinch, but his eyes burned with quiet rage. Taniya's voice steadied. "But now, I'm done being quiet." She sat down. The silence afterward was thick, not hollow, not polite, weighted. It wasn't just about Taniya anymore. She'd spoken for every person in the room who had smiled through injustice, who had swallowed offenses in fear of being labeled dramatic, difficult, angry. Elliot looked back at the screen. We'll be reviewing your future with the board. Umar nodded. Understood. Just then, a fourth window popped up on the video call. Board member Edwin Loring. Elliot blinked in surprise. Edwin? Edwin, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and a voice like gravel, stared solemnly into the camera. I've been listening. His face was lined with guilt. This isn't the first time Brian's name has come up, he said. 3 years ago, he was quietly moved from another location after similar concerns. I was on that call. Elliot's jaw tightened. You didn't escalate it. Edwin lowered his head. I didn't want to rock the boat. We were expanding fast. Numbers looked good. It was easier to reassign him. Elliot's voice was ice. So instead of addressing the problem, you relocated it. Edwin nodded. I failed, and I'm prepared to step down from the board. The room gasped. Even Elliot didn't respond immediately. I'll be issuing a formal apology to the employees, Edwin added. And to you, Taniya. He clicked out of the call. The screen blinked once more. Only 2 faces remained. And Elliot Keynes. He turned to the store, a storm in his voice now restrained by pure resolve. This stops now. A board member confesses this isn't the first case against Brian. The storm passed, but the air still felt electric. Cascade Grocer's flagship store was quieter than it had been in weeks. The customers had returned to browsing, the carts rolled along the polished aisles, and the playlist resumed its gentle jazz, as if the confrontation hadn't just ripped through the walls like thunder. But inside the break room, now eerily calm, Taniya sat across from Elliot Kane, the man who had changed everything. Her uniform felt heavy, like it no longer fit, not because of size, but because of meaning. Everything it represented had twisted in her mind, and now she stood on the edge of something she couldn't quite name. Elliot spoke first. I know this isn't why you came here. I know this wasn't part of any plan. Taniya didn't respond right away. Her eyes stayed on her lap. I came here to pay rent, she finally said. To work. That's all. Elliot nodded slowly. And instead you exposed a system that's been sick for years. She looked up then. Not alone. I didn't start this.
You stood up when it mattered, Elliot said. You held your ground. That's more than most ever do.
A long silence followed. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside, a formal offer letter. Cascade, Corporate HQ. A new position, Director of Equity and Inclusion Strategy, reporting directly to the Executive Board. Taniya stared at it, the letters blurring slightly in her vision. I'm not qualified for this, she whispered. You're more qualified than anyone I've ever met, Elliot replied. Because you don't speak corporate. You speak truth. And we've had too many people who forgot what that sounds like. Taniya didn't touch the folder. I'm not sure I can walk back into this company and pretend like it didn't break me first, she said. Elliot leaned forward. You don't have to pretend. You just have to build it better. It was tempting. The power. The platform. The chance to protect people who were still where she had been just weeks ago. But temptation wasn't enough. She still felt the bruises, emotional, unseen, but real. And part of her feared what would happen when the spotlight moved on, when the next story went viral. What happens, she asked softly, when the camera stopped rolling? Elliot didn't blink. You'll still be backed. With resources. With a team. With therapy, if you want it. With a security detail if you need it. Whatever it takes. She looked away. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message. Unknown number. You don't know me. I used to work for Brian in 2021. I quit after he made me cry in front of a customer, and then told me to toughen up if I wanted to last. I never said anything, but you did. Thank you. Another message came through moments later. He told me I wasn't Cascade material. I wish I'd said something. You were brave. And another. They kept coming. Former employees. Silent victims. People who had buried their stories because they thought no one would care. Now they were writing to Taniya like she was more than a cashier. Like she was a lighthouse. She swallowed hard. Elliot watched her carefully. He could see the weight of it settling into her chest. The burden of being a symbol. But he didn't push. He just said, take the weekend. Think it through. No pressure. As he stood to leave, he added, just know, I didn't offer this to fix what's broken. I offered it because I want you at the table when we rebuild. He left the break room without waiting for a response. Taniya stared at the folder. It wasn't the clean corporate prize she imagined. It was messy, complicated, layered with pain, but it was real. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel powerless. Brian was suspended. That was the official word from the board. Pending review and outcome of internal audit. It wasn't the termination some demanded, but it was a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. His badge was deactivated. He was locked out of all systems. Legal was preparing a more permanent decision, but the slowness stung. To many, it felt like hesitation. To Elliot, it felt like a test. He knew how corporate machinery worked. People like Brian didn't just get fired. They negotiated their exits. They threatened lawsuits. They spun narratives. HR would tiptoe until they were sure they wouldn't get burned too. Taniya watched the headlines fade. The TikTok views plateaued. The protests slowed, but the work was just beginning. She walked into her first therapy session that week. Talked about the surveillance she'd felt every day in her own skin. The exhaustion of being hyper-aware. The anger she'd buried. The shame she'd mistaken for professionalism. She didn't leave healed, but she left lighter. On Friday afternoon, she called Elliot. "I'll do it," she said. "The job." He didn't celebrate. He just said, "I'll see you Monday. We've got a lot to fix." That night, the Cascade Grocer's internal messaging board, usually quiet, lit up with a ping. A leak. An anonymous email shared across store teams nationwide. Subject line: "For internal eyes only. Email thread from HR regarding optics management." It included a chain of internal emails between Brian and 3 HR reps. In one, Brian wrote, "This girl is becoming a liability. Might need to shuffle her out quietly. Optics matter, but so does store control." Another replied, "Agreed. We'll spin it as performance-related if needed. Keep her out of public visibility until media fades." The timestamp was dated the morning after the TikTok video went viral. The file spread like wildfire. Employees screen captured. Posted anonymously. Shared with former staff. The same board members who had just promised transparency were now implicated in private attempts to manage the narrative, not address the issue. Taniya saw it on her feed at 2 a.m. She stared at the words, her throat tightening. She hadn't even started her new role yet. And the storm had already returned. Only this time, she wasn't the target. She was the one with a voice. Someone leaks a company email, and it's explosive. The leaked email spread like a gas fire, quiet at first, then explosive. It didn't just trend, it detonated. What was once viewed as a workplace injustice now read like a scandalous exposé, and the evidence was damning in a way that couldn't be softened with PR language or apology statements. The email wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. It had been sent from Brian Decker's company account to 3 HR officials during the peak of the social media backlash. The subject line was casual, strategic store cleanup. But what followed was anything but. Lines that once lived in whispered conversations were now immortalized in black and white. "This chick is gonna take the whole thing down if we don't get ahead of it. Tell legal to prep for optics. Say she violated protocol. Something about code of conduct. Use the tone card if needed. I still don't know how she got hired. We're supposed to screen for brand fit. Look matters. You can't coach culture into someone who talks like that. Next time we need to be tighter on appearance. No more aggressive hairstyles. No more DEI charity hires." Then came the kicker. Start cleaning the files. If there's anything sensitive on her or other former complainers, delete it. If it's not logged, it didn't happen. That line. If it's not logged, it didn't happen. It was a weapon disguised as policy. A digital erasure of real lives. Real harm. One of the HR recipients had tried to scrub the message, forwarding it as spam, but a junior staffer had flagged it. That staffer, who remained anonymous, uploaded it to a private forum of former employees. Within hours, it leaked to Reddit, then to Twitter, then to the inboxes of national journalists. By morning it was on CNN. The company's image, once polished and progressive, now stood shattered under a spotlight that wasn't going away. The headlines were brutal. Cascade execs tried to clean black voices from records. Washington Post. Leak confirms racist practices were top down at Cascade. Vox. DI tokenism, erasure, and the corporate lie. The Cascade story. The Atlantic. Elliot Kane sat at the center of a firestorm. He had built the house, but now people wondered if he'd let the rot settle in too long. Investors called hourly. PR firms begged for a strategy. Board members fumbled through email apologies, distancing themselves from Brian, from HR, from their own silence. And yet Elliot didn't flinch. He reread the email in full. Every line of venomous casual racism. and felt something old and bitter swell inside him. Not just as a CEO, but as a black man who had long moved through spaces pretending not to notice when his own presence made others nervous. He had allowed a system to run too long on autopilot, and it had failed the very people it claimed to protect. Now the damage was public, irreversible. But this was also the moment to start telling the truth, not just in boardrooms but everywhere. At the center of it all stood Taniya. The girl they tried to push out of frame was now the image on the homepage of every news article. Her photo, once taken for a staff badge, now symbolized something much bigger. People compared her to whistleblowers, civil rights leaders, and movement makers, not because she sought the spotlight, but because she endured it. And still she didn't act like she'd won anything. When reporters showed up at her apartment complex, she slipped out the back. When TV stations emailed interview requests, she left them unanswered. Not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. The kind that lives deep in your bones. She hadn't set out to be a hero. She had set out to survive. That didn't change just because the world decided she mattered. But Elliot knew she was now the most important voice in the company. At a press conference when asked who would be leading Cascade's internal restructuring, Elliot didn't blink. Taniya Brooks, he said. Our new director of equity and inclusion. She's already started. Reporters leaned in, surprised. She's not a consultant, he added. She's not temporary. And she's not just here for appearances. She has the authority to recommend terminations, shape hiring policy, and build training from scratch. The backlash was immediate in some circles. Old guard executives whispering that it was too fast, too loud. Social media trolls questioned her experience. But Elliot didn't budge, because he knew she had what none of them did. Credibility. Lived truth. A spine forged in real fires. And Taniya. She didn't want revenge. She wanted change. In her first week, she rewrote the cultural onboarding process, introduced anonymous reporting tools, held open forums in multiple stores where employees, especially marginalized ones, could speak without fear of retribution. She hired 2 former employees Brian had driven out. One was now helping audit HR systems. The other was building a training curriculum. In every store she visited, people pulled her aside. Thank you. You made me feel like I wasn't crazy. My sister worked here. She left because of this. It was overwhelming and healing. But as the flames settled into embers, something new flared. Elliot received a message, an encrypted note from Brian's legal representative. My client is requesting a private off-record meeting, with Mr. Kane only. No attorneys. No HR. One condition, it must be face-to-face. Elliot read it 3 times. He showed it to no one. Then forwarded it to his legal team, with one question. Can I accept this and still keep the outcome admissible? They replied, only if you record it, and only if you say nothing confidential in return. He stared at the screen, then picked up his phone, and called Taniya. I may be meeting with him, he said. There was a long pause. She exhaled. Why? Because people like him don't leave cleanly. They linger. They poison. I want to hear what he thinks he has left. Another pause. Do I get to come? Elliot didn't answer immediately. Then, if you do, he might not talk. Then let him talk, she said. But don't forget who's listening. Elliot closed his eyes. The email had burned down the lies. But sometimes, the last flames were the hardest to put out. Brian agrees to meet Elliot in person, under one condition. The door clicked shut with a quiet finality. Elliot Kane sat behind a wide, minimal desk in his glass-walled office, overlooking downtown Atlanta. The city stretched beneath him like a chessboard. But this morning his attention wasn't on the skyline. It was on the man who just walked into the room. Brian Decker wore a fitted navy suit. Hair slicked, demeanor confident, too confident. His lips twitched at the corners, somewhere between smirk and sneer. You know, Brian said, lowering himself into the guest chair without invitation. For someone who just spent weeks dragging my name through the mud, you look surprisingly relaxed. Elliot said nothing. Brian chuckled and crossed one leg over the other. I assume this meeting is your attempt to salvage something, because I've already spoken to legal. And let's be clear, if you're planning to fire me without cause, I will own a piece of Cascade when I'm done. Elliot leaned back slightly, his face unreadable. I'm here to listen, he said simply. Brian blinked. That wasn't what he expected. Good, he said, composing himself again. Because this whole circus, it was manufactured. Viral videos, social media mobs, a cashier who played the victim like a pro. You think I'm the first manager to say something edgy off the record? Come on, Elliot. You're too smart for this. You've run a company. You know how it works. Elliot remained silent. Brian's voice grew bolder. The truth is, I was protecting your brand, keeping it polished, consistent, not letting things fall apart. I know what your customer base expects. Professionalism, cleanliness, familiarity. I didn't hire based on race. I hired based on fit. And deleted complaints based on fit? Elliot asked. Brian waved a hand. Old systems. Bad documentation. HR should have caught it. Not my job to fix their mess. Elliot finally stood. Not fast, not angry, just deliberately. He walked to a nearby console and tapped a remote. The wall behind him lit up. Footage from a high-resolution security cam. Brian watching Taniya mop spilled wine. His face cold. His posture dismissive. Another clip. Brian laughing in the break room, repeating the diversity decoration comment. Then a freeze frame. The email titled Strategic Store Cleanup. Brian's smirk began to wilt. I'm not sure if you understand what this is, Elliot said. This isn't a vendetta. It's a pattern. A documented, time-stamped, verified archive of everything you said, deleted, and allowed. Brian opened his mouth, but no words came out. Elliot stepped closer, voice still calm. You were never protecting my company. You were protecting your illusion of control. Brian's voice finally returned, cracked at the edges. If you fire me, I go to court. Wrongful termination. Defamation. I'll take this entire board down. Elliot's smile was thin. I didn't say anything about firing you. He pressed another button. A third clip began. Brian's voice, on the phone with HR. This girl is going to take the whole thing down. Start cleaning the files. I didn't approve that recording, Brian began. But Elliot held up a hand. You didn't have to. It was already stored in the server's passive audio feed, the one you signed off on as part of compliance protocol. You forgot we were always watching. Brian's jaw worked, trying to shape a response. Elliot moved behind his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a letter. Your termination is not pending. It's processed. Cause has been established. Legal has reviewed. You've been stripped of all executive privileges. Your corporate accounts are closed. Your access revoked. Brian stood, but Elliot's voice cut through him. And if you so much as step into another Cascade location, security has instructions to remove you. At that cue, 2 uniformed guards stepped into the room silently and stood behind Brian. I made this place what it is, Brian spat. I kept it clean. I made it efficient. You made it toxic. Elliot said softly. And now you're done. Brian's chest heaved once, then again, but there was nothing left to say. He turned, brushing past the guards, and walked toward the door. Before he left, he looked back over his shoulder. You think this ends with me? He asked. You're going to find out just how deep this goes. Elliot stared at him. I already have. The door shut, and Brian Decker was gone. Elliot walked back to his desk, exhaled slowly, and turned to face the giant screen again. Behind him, the skyline glittered. He tapped the console once more. A new file loaded. Not evidence. A message. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked straight at the camera. Because there was still one more thing the world needed to hear. Elliot turns to the screen. There's one more message to send. The red recording light blinked once. Then it stayed on. Elliot Kane sat in a plain black chair at the center of the studio. No banners. No branding. Just a white wall behind him. And a microphone clipped to his collar. He wore a simple navy button-down. No suit jacket. No tie. This wasn't a press release. It was a reckoning. A few feet to his right sat Taniya Brooks, poised but quiet, her hands folded in her lap. She wore no makeup. No performance. Just presence. Strong, calm, and unshakably human. The producer nodded from behind the camera. We're live across the internal network. Elliot took a breath. My name is Elliot Kane, he began, his voice steady. I founded Cascade Grocers over 20 years ago, with one mission: to create a space where people felt cared for, both the customers and the employees. He paused, but somewhere along the way, we lost that mission. We got bigger, slicker, more concerned with image than with impact. And in that silence, we allowed harm to grow. Across hundreds of locations, thousands of employees gathered in break rooms, conference rooms, and empty aisles. Watch. I want to speak plainly, Elliot continued. What happened at our flagship store in Atlanta wasn't a one-off. It wasn't an isolated bad actor. It was a system that protected comfort over justice, appearance over integrity. Taniya lifted her chin slightly, not defiantly, just with a quiet resolve. The person next to me, Elliot said, turning toward her, was mistreated, dismissed, humiliated, not because she lacked talent, but because our structure made it easier to ignore her than to hear her. The camera panned slowly to Taniya. She spoke. My name is Taniya Brooks. Some of you know my story, but I'm not here today because I want attention. I'm here because I want to make sure that no one else in this company ever has to choose between keeping their job and keeping their dignity. In stores across the country, employees leaned closer to their screens. Some stood still, others sat silently with arms crossed, or jaws tight, but many, especially those who'd once walked similar paths, felt something break open inside them. I've accepted the position of Director of Equity and Inclusion, Taniya continued, and I'm not coming to clean up the mess. I'm coming to build something new with all of you. The screen cut back to Elliot. Effective immediately, he announced. Cascade will be implementing 3 nationwide changes. First, mandatory leadership training, not once but quarterly for every manager, supervisor, and executive. No exceptions. Second, independent audits of all employee complaints going back 5 years. Nothing will be deleted. Nothing will be buried.
Third, the launch of our new open door policy. A direct line from every store to corporate, where anyone can speak without fear. If you're silenced, I want to hear it.
At a location in Colorado, a black cashier wiped her eyes silently. In a store in Brooklyn, a Dominican deli supervisor let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. In Iowa, a biracial teenager watching from the floral counter whispered to herself. Finally, Taniya leaned forward again. If you've ever been made to feel like you weren't enough because of your skin, your hair, your voice, this is for you. If you've been told to tone it down, to smile more, to fit the brand, this is for you too. She paused. And if you're watching this and thinking, I've done that to someone, this is your chance to change. The camera returned to Elliot one final time. We don't get to decide when the truth catches up, he said, but we do decide what we do once it arrives. And now it's here. He looked directly into the lens. We hear you. We see you. And we're not going back. The red light blinked off. The recording ended. But across the country, the reaction was just beginning. By midday, internal networks lit up. Messages from store teams poured into the new open door inbox. Stories of mistreatment, subtle bias, lost promotions, silenced voices, but also hope. One manager in Seattle wrote, I didn't know what was happening, but I should have. Thank you for showing me. A cashier in Tampa, I left last year after getting bullied. I never expected to see someone like me in leadership. Thank you, Taniya. At the corporate office, Taniya sat in a quiet corner of her new workspace, reading the incoming messages. They didn't feel like congratulations. They felt like confessions, unspoken grief, now finally let out into the open. She created folders: investigate, follow up, support. No story would be lost. Elliot watched from his office as the internal heat map glowed brighter by the hour. Store after store lighting up with voices. But then came an alert. Subject, Argent, Mississippi location. Tag escalated threat. It was a message from an employee. Anonymous. The content was short. This location has worse than what you've seen. Check the cameras from April. They forced someone out after they cried in the back room. We have audio. You need to see it. Elliot stood immediately. There was no time to wait. Because if what the message said was true, this story wasn't over. It was only deepening. One location in Mississippi reveals an even darker secret. The fluorescent hum of the first store she ever worked in, the same one that nearly broke her, sounded different now. Taniya Brooks stood in front of the building, flanked by store associates, district leaders, and local media. A crisp banner hung above the sliding doors. Welcome to Brooks Market, a Cascade flagship. It was surreal. Not because she sought recognition, but because the place that once saw her as invisible had become a symbol of accountability, growth, and truth. She hadn't just survived the system. She had re-entered it, with the power to change it from the inside. And that's exactly what she did. In the months after the video, after the email, after Brian's public unraveling, Taniya didn't disappear into an office or hide behind press statements. She showed up. Every week she visited a different Cascade location. From Charlotte to Oakland, from Detroit to El Paso, She didn't arrive with bodyguards or entourage. She wore sneakers and jeans, sat in stockrooms, ate with cashiers, spoke softly, but listened louder. She held town halls, not to lecture, but to ask questions no one had asked them before. What would make you feel safer at work? When was the last time someone above you really listened? What have you never said out loud because you feared losing your job? The answers changed her and shaped the new DNA of the company. She rewrote the employee handbook. Not with legal jargon, but with language people could live by. No more tolerance for coded feedback. No more silence when someone crossed the line. No more hiding behind HR emails and buried reports. She established a new standard called radical respect. It wasn't a training. It was a shift in values. And within 3 months, more than 87% of employees across all stores had opted in voluntarily. But it didn't stop there. Other companies began to notice. First came inquiries, then invitations, then collaboration requests. A popular apparel brand invited her to advise on inclusive hiring. A global airline asked her to train its in-flight crew leadership. Soon, what began as one woman's fight to keep a low-wage job had transformed into a movement across industries. And when a university in Atlanta announced a full-ride scholarship for students pursuing social justice careers under her name, she cried for the first time in weeks, not because she was overwhelmed, but because it finally felt real. For every door slammed in her face. For every shift she was forced to work solo. For every time she was told to smile through it. Now there were doors opening for others. Meanwhile, Elliot Kane quietly backed her at every turn. He didn't seek praise, didn't use her name in earnings calls. Instead, he watched his company transform. Stock prices dipped in the early weeks after the scandal, but then surged as public trust rebuilt. Not because of spin, but because of substance. They were no longer trying to look like they cared. They did care, and it showed. Then came the day she returned to the store where it all started. But this time, not as a cashier, as a partner. The building had been repainted. The lighting softened. The staff greeted her not with nervous energy, but with pride. Carrie and Adam, the two cashiers who once laughed in the break room, were both gone. One had quietly resigned, the other transferred. Their silence was its own apology. The new store manager, a young woman named Priya Desai, walked with Taniya through the aisles. "She's our best hire," a produce clerk whispered. "First one to actually ask how we're doing, not just what we're doing." In the back office, the break room had been redesigned. It no longer smelled of burnt coffee and resignation. It had warmth. And a wall painted with words chosen by the staff. Seen, heard, value. Taniya smiled, then turned to the small crowd behind her. A journalist asked, "What does this renaming mean to you?" She paused, then said, "It means the truth matters. It means people can change. It means no one stays at the bottom forever." Then she added, "But most of all, it means we're not done." That night, after the event ended and the cameras turned off, Elliot invited her back to headquarters. They sat in the executive boardroom. No suits, no scripts. Elliot opened his laptop. "There's one thing I want you to see." He tapped a key. On the massive projector screen behind him, a grainy black and white security video flickered to life. It was the very first footage from day one, from the morning Taniya started. There she was, in her uniform, hair neat, expression guarded. She stood behind Register 4, scanning items with careful precision. Shoppers passed her without eye contact. A bag ripped, a child screamed. She smiled anyway. Then came the bottle. The shatter. Brian entering, finger raised. "You want to work here or waste time?" Elliot pressed pause and looked at Taniya. "This has been playing in our lobby all week," he said, not to shame, but to remind. This is where change began, right here, in silence, in cruelty, and in your strength. Taniya looked at her own frozen frame on the screen. She didn't look powerful, but she had been. "Do you want to take it down?" Elliot asked gently. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Leave it. Let them see what pretending not to notice looks like." Outside the boardroom, the city moved on. New customers, new complaints, new days. But inside Cascade Grocers, something had shifted permanently. Taniya Brooks had walked into a job to pay the bills. She left a blueprint for justice. The security camera footage from day one, this time playing at corporate headquarters. No one should have to beg to be seen, or prove their worth just to be treated with dignity. Taniya's story isn't rare, it's just finally been heard. If you've ever felt invisible, or watched someone get silenced, don't scroll past this. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.